Hi, I'm Jeff Murrow. I want to welcome you to True Texas History, where today we are going to talk about the importance of the Texas coast during the Civil War. Having grown up in Texas and attending public schools in Texas, one thing that was never talked much about was the importance of the Texas coast during the war between the states. Now, I know I called it the Civil War. It was technically the war between the states, or um, it's various other titles. Some people call it the Constitutional War, but um, at least this way you know what I'm talking about. And I always thought, more had to have happened in Texas. What made it important? And I was reminded of that because over the Christmas holidays, went down to the Texas coast and spent some time down there. And they have a fascinating history there along the Texas coast. And it was an area that had quite a bit of importance. During the war, of course, Galveston was important as a port, as well as places like Corpus Christi and Brownsville. And Galveston's been talked about quite a bit, so I'm not going to be talking so much about that. I'm going to be talking about down there on the mouth of the Brazos River, Caney Creek, Port Lavaca, Indianola, that area. Um, and when, of course, it was frightening when Galveston was captured by Union troops. And when it was finally liberated, it was cause for a lot of celebration. But there was still a lot of concern on the upper Texas coast. And Union forces had made it a point of conducting raids to destroy the salt works. People forget the importance of salt works, but salt works, and there were several within the state of Texas, were important to the war effort because you need salt to preserve meat, but also some forms of salt you needed to be part of the ingredients in gunpowder. And, if you had any location that had a salt works, it was very important. And in 1862, the Union forces had managed to conduct a raid on the Texas coast and destroyed one salt works. And of course, Texas authorities were all up in arms, saying, we can't have this happen again. And so they proceeded to go ahead and build fortifications and strong points along the Texas coast to prevent that from happening again. Of course, part of the problem is they didn't have a lot of troops to work with. And it didn't help that, anytime that they started to work on the fortifications, Union gunboats would come along the coast and bombard them. And so they would find themselves having to work on building the fortifications at night and abandoning them during the day because the bombardments would be so hostile. Because, the Union Navy made it a point of, they had bombarded several Texas cities along the coast and had occupied places. Now, after Galveston was retaken, there was still a force of possibly 9 to 20,000 troops around Fort Esperanza. Let me go ahead and give you a reference point. Let's just say around the Port Aransas area, but between the area around Port Aransas on up to Galveston, that area of the coast was largely unprotected, and we had roughly maybe 9,000 men that we could summon to go ahead and protect it, whereas the Union forces in that area had about 44,000 men. So there was definitely a discrepancy in terms of available manpower, and that was why they were scrambling to go ahead and build the defensive works to prevent further salt works from being destroyed. I'm also reminding you, it was during that time that there in Gonzales, Texas, they built a large earthen fortification. And some of you probably scratching and said, why would they do that? Well, they knew that the gunboats, there was a possibility that they could come up the Guadalupe River. And so the construction of forts was necessary, not only in places like Gonzales. And, if you ever get a chance to go to Gonzales, there's a little area called the top of the town, and outside of there is the earthen fort known as Fort Wall, um, because Thomas Wall of Wall's Texas Legion was from the Gonzales area. But down there on the coast, they were busy constructing fortifications on the Caney to go ahead and protect some of those areas around the mouth of the Brazos and some of those other areas down there. And there were several engagements between Confederate cavalry and Union naval forces trying to run raids in through there. And you had people like the 8th Texas Infantry, which was Hobby's infantry. You also had 35th Texas Cavalry, Likens Cavalry, and Terrell's cavalry there to protect the Texas coast. Now, Terrell's cavalry is quite interesting. It was one of the few units that there's a strong record of a lot of integration within that unit. But these were units that patrolled the Texas coast to go ahead and keep these raiders at bay. Because there were these, they would send the gunboats in, blow things up, or try to blow things up, and the cavalry would try to catch them when they landed. So it was almost like a cat and mouse type of game along the Texas coast. And in fact, a lot of relic hunters have found cannonballs and uniform buttons, belt buckles, artifacts such as that up and down the Texas coast, at least in that area of the middle Texas coast. And it represented a significant weakness in the defenses of Texas. Because there were several episodes of fighting in Texas. There were attempts of trying to invade Texas through the Brownsville area. There were several attempts along the coast. And there was this constant threat of the gunboats made it important to go ahead and build the fortifications. They finally succeeded in finishing the fortifications. Of course, the Yankees were always wondering, why are they doing this? And in the mind of the Texans, we were out to protect our people and protect our resources. They were important to protect. I mean, we had limited resources, so we had to protect what was there. But I wanted to go ahead and touch on this because it is an important part of the war effort that people often forget. Because a lot of times that part of the Texas coast is seen as, a backwater. It's good for fishing. And a lot of times hurricanes hit there, but they don't know a whole lot about what happened there. There was history there when, cities like Indianola and Velasco were in the center of Texas history. Indianola was the #1 port for people coming into Texas at one point, and we forget about that. I mean, now it's just vacant prairie out there, but it was once much more important, and the officials here were protecting it because everything back then did not revolve around Houston, Austin, and the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There was much more to Texas than that. They had to protect El Paso and the salt works out there. They had to protect the salt works along the coast. They had to protect the guano deposits throughout Texas and some of our resources, gun factories, because we did have our own gun factories for a while. And then there was the rocket research area in San Antonio that you don't hear much about. So, San Antonio should take pride that their city was a selection for rocket research during the Civil War. Do they do that? No. San Antonio, some parts of San Antonio, they hate history. But we need to know more about these aspects of history and the importance of Texas, because we did have a lot of resources and there were some significant challenges faced by Texas during that time of conflict. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to leave them below. I know I didn't cover everything in massive detail. There are a lot of little points that I could bring up, like where people camped and all that. One good book that deals with the issues on the coast is Bobby McKinney's book, Confederates on the Caney. This is not one that you see very often. It's worth picking up. A lot of pictures. He's a relic hunter. A lot of information on the relics there. I think you would find that quite fascinating if you're into local Texas history along that part of the coast. Had a chance of meeting him years ago. Enjoyed it. Glad you tuned in today. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have suggestions for other ones, other people, events in Texas history, feel free to leave them below. I know I haven't been here every day. I'm doing good to do once a week, but glad you tuned in. Hope you have a good weekend. Vaya con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.